Beef Market Update with Ann Dunford on realagriculture.com is brought to you by Haney Farms. Do you need seed? Find us at haneyfarms.com. It's time for another edition of the Beef Market Update on realagriculture.com with Ann Dunford. Welcome today, Ann.
Hi, Sean. How's it going?
It's going really good, Ann. Let's start with the cash and futures price trending higher. What is some of your thoughts on that?
Well, I do think if you've been following cash markets on fed cattle or feeder cattle, especially in the U.S., and or futures markets on both live cattle or feeder cattle, I think you can safely assume or make the assumption at this point in time that we've put in our summer lows and markets are working higher. And we were expecting this as we got towards the end of this month and into September, but I think here on the 21st of August we can most certainly say that. So coming off of our summer lows, there's some higher beef prices. We had a nice jump last week in the choice cutout price, and of course that will help fuel a stronger U.S. cash market at 120. And then of course looking further out into 2013, we've got the deferred futures, especially from April and beyond. They're back up to new levels again, record contract highs, or near at least. And so can those kind of levels start to help sustain or maybe even improve this feeder market a little bit as we head into the fall run?
So are there some good hedging opportunities then for producers in those really long deferred months?
Well, there's a lot of unknowns when you start to talk about well into 2013. Of course, the biggest unknown and the biggest change that we've had occur in the last 2.5 months has, of course, been grain prices, namely corn, and what that's done to the cost of gain. So it's very difficult today to go out and get a lot of pricing done for that kind of length, and at the same time still looking at if you've got markets that are kind of starting to move upwards on the futures market. I guess I would suggest to most those would-be hedgers that this is a time to maybe be a little bit patient, and that there could be some more advancements coming at us, but it also means you've got to have your eye on the ball.
Well, even as a buyer of feed grains, even if you had the intent of locking in some live cattle futures, it can be very difficult to lock up some feed supply for, we're now at the end of August for next April.
Exactly. And so that it sounds pretty on paper to say I could make it work at this, but the reality of it is putting all of the physical products to bed as far as being able to manage the entire cost structure all the way through. So, and still lots of volatility ahead for these grain markets. We're not done harvest yet, and we've got another crop ahead of us before we start to talk about 2013.
Let's drop down to the U.S. situation. U.S. July placements were down 10%. You're saying that August is projected to be down another 10%. What's going on here?
Well, it was an interesting report on Friday. It was the U.S. Cattle on Feed report, is what you're referring to. And we did see July placements down 10%. Now, don't forget, we were comparing that July to July of 2011, which was, of course, the massive drought placement coming out of Texas and Oklahoma when we had the drought out of the south last year. So I think the key thing this year is, first of all, if you compare that July number to, say, a 5-year average, it's still up 6. So granted, not as many cattle being placed on feed as, what the news stories were this time last year, but compared to a 5-year average, they're still historically high, so 6% higher. So we're going to go through August, and it looks like probably a very similar scenario. Down another 10% would be kind of my call at this point in time. So you're going to see numbers start to show some reductions. And I think that's one of the key things to remember in this 2012 versus 2011, that we are seeing placements smaller than last year's kind of drought panic there in the summertime. U.S. beef cow slaughter, as we speak, is down 10%. So again, last year's beef cow slaughter was very much a drought-driven, highest slaughter since 1996 for beef cows. This one looks like, at this point in time, and again, it's the middle of August, but it looks like U.S. producers are trying everything they possibly can so far to keep the cows at home.
What kind of impact does that bring for the U.S. cattle feeder? What impact does that have on the market?
Well, the impact continues to be the underlying story of tighter supplies. And you're going to see smaller numbers. We've seen basically the yearling placement, if you will, in the U.S. Occur in June and July because of the drought. Now you're going to have a period of time where there will be some forages, it looks like, available in areas that we're unable to harvest. And that should be supportive to probably the light calf market, and keep some of those calves maybe out of feedlots for now, until we get further into the year and probably a little bit more stability or knowns around the cost of gain and feed prices. So if producers can find any other way to put cost of gain on right now versus corn in a feedlot, I think that's going to be the number one driver and keep some cattle out of finishing feedlots for the short run.
When we look at the Canada-U.S. trade, there's been a lot of talk about Canadian feeder cattle going to head south. We've got a Canadian dollar that's now above, it's kind of holding above par. I think it's actually above 101. Mm-hmm. Is that kind of put the end to that sort of discussion?
Yeah, it's funny how 2012 is going to go down of kind of a tale of two tales on feeder cattle movement. The first half of the year, and we talked about this earlier this year, Sean, of course, lots of feeder cattle were making their way out of Western Canada into the Pacific Northwest especially. And we thought that pattern would potentially continue before we started talking about a drought in the Corn Belt. And now we've basically turned that whole story around and said, once again, it looks like even though all of our costs of gain are higher than they were, it still looks like a competitive advantage to finish cattle in Western Canada vis-a-vis, say the Corn Belt or Nebraska area. So it is going to change our earlier talk that cattle could move south, and I think there's an argument, depending on what calf prices trade for in the U.S., could there be some movement of calves into Western Canada into a pretty good supply of forage conditions and also a competitive, more than competitive cost of gain.
Have you heard of any scenarios yet where we're talking about, say, U.S. feeder cattle moving north, or more just discussions at this point?
It's mostly a discussion at this point in time. And again, until we get a market established and you start to get a feel for where calf prices are actually going to be, I mean, we've all got an opinion, but until you actually start to see that market developing with some kind of volume, I think most decisions are made on the day of the market. And at this point today, it's not moving cattle one way or the other. So, I think as we get down, even a month is going to be scarcely enough time. In 2 months, we'll have a much better idea. And again, it'll be on the feeder cattle price of the day and the Canadian dollar of the day that'll make that decision. So it's not something we can sit about and talk today about in advance. It's something that if the stars come into a line on that given day, cattle will move north. And if they don't, then we're going to see basically the cattle here in Western Canada most certainly stay here.
Ugly scenario for the U.S. cattle feeder that contracted Canadian feeder cattle early in the spring to go south if he did not hedge that U.S. Canadian dollar exchange.
Oh, and and I think the silent killer, well, maybe, but I don't know what we should name this. Some of the moves we've had in the Canadian dollar, but here we get so focused on, of course, cattle price and corn price and barley price that quietly, as this dollar has moved above par, that most certainly has taken some of the bloom out of cattle prices as well heading into the fall run. And again, that's a storyline that cattle producers in this country are unfortunately very much well aware of.
Ken, thanks a lot, and we'll talk to you again in 2 weeks.
Okay, super, Sean.